For this episode of Coffee with Closers, I'm sitting down with TK Kader. TK was the founder of ToutApp, a pioneer in the sales engagement space. He took the company from 0 to 7 million in annual recurring revenue and sold it to Marketo. At Marketo, he served as the senior VP of strategy and helped drive the 2-year transformation that led to a 4.7 billion exit to Adobe. Now TK coaches early stage SaaS CEOs in building scalable go-to-market machines to help accelerate the early stage growth using the same playbooks that he used at ToutApp and Marketo. Stay tuned for my conversation with TK.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Coffee with Closers, where business leaders share insights on how to build businesses from the ground up and best practices for innovating in their industry.
Hey TK, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Thanks for having me. Super pumped to be here.
Most certainly. Well, every entrepreneur has an interesting story of how they became an entrepreneur. And I know I was kind of going through your YouTube stories and videos that you've shared. You have had a couple of ventures before you actually stumbled upon your first exit, right? So can you share a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey of how you became an entrepreneur and kind of the companies that you built?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been an entrepreneur for quite some time. My dad was an entrepreneur, so I got pulled into the game super early. My first startup was in college. We made an online calendar. It was called HipCal. It was our senior year of college, and we started the company, grew it to thousands of users, and by the time we were graduating, we got acquired. So that was my first taste in building startups. So right after graduation, we all moved from upstate New York, where we went to school, to Silicon Valley, rented out a 6-bedroom house with a pool and a hot tub, and started working for a Silicon Valley company. It was incredible. And that's really when I got the first taste of what startups were all about and how you could build software and build massive scale businesses really quickly.
And then from there, you went down to start. Is that where the ToutApp came about, or that was another?
ToutApp came a little bit later. So HipCal was my first company. Sold it to Plaxo. Worked at Plaxo. Comcast bought Plaxo. After that, I worked at Bridgewater. Bridgewater is one of the largest hedge funds in the world. After Bridgewater, I started ToutApp. ToutApp was one of the earliest players in the sales engagement space, and we scaled that to about 7 million ARR. We're backed by Andreessen Horowitz. Sold that company to Marketo. At that point, Marketo had just gone private with Vista Private Equity. I joined Marketo's executive team, and together with the executive team, we led a 2-year transformation where we took the company to an exit with Adobe at 4.75 billion.
Yeah, so pretty successful story of how the entire journey took you. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's been a crazy ride. You can't quite plan it, but somehow I ended up working for the best hedge fund, raised from the best VC fund, and worked with the best PE fund through that 15-year journey.
Awesome. So basically, of all the things you've accomplished in your career, what's one thing that you're super proud of?
I think the thing you end up being proud of the most is the impact you've had, and probably the lasting impact that I'm most proud of are the people that I worked with and how it grew their careers and the type of value we created in the market. So I think sales engagement is a multi-billion-dollar space now. We had a small part in creating that space, and very thankful for that. The people that joined us are all in incredible roles now, growing other SaaS businesses. Some have started their own. Really proud of that. So I would say the best is the impact on the people's lives that we've had.
Most certainly. And I remember being a customer of ToutApp years ago. I can't remember how far back that was. I think ToutApp, like you just said, it was the kind of early in its days in terms of sales enablement tools. And we've looked at Yesware, and I think Yesware is probably still around. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And ToutApp, and then after a while we left. I think SalesLoft was just coming into picture at the time. We jumped ship and went to SalesLoft. I think part of the reason was the calling feature, if I can remember correctly. And then ultimately ended up in Outreach, and then now with HubSpot. So there's been a lot of players that came into that space since ToutApp. So obviously you've kind of pioneered the sales and engagement platform space.
Yeah, even today, I think Outreach is one of the largest. They're probably north of 100 million. SalesLoft is probably north of 60. But you still have InsideSales.com who rebranded, and on top of that, there's a Zant. No one knows what that means, but good for them. But I think what's incredible about the space is, HubSpot got into it. ToutApp lives on under Marketo, Sales Engage, Sales Insights. So they had an Insights product. We combined it with ToutApp. So now it's an Adobe product. And then there's like a long tail of additional sales engagement tools. You have Reply, Persist IQ, Wavo, Mailshake, and I feel like there's one in every 100 founders are starting a sales engagement company, which is kind of insane.
It's crazy. And I think, it was CRM was kind of the basic necessity to start a sales organization. Now you got an entire tech stack, right? Like there's not just engagement metrics, also intent data that you can actually get access to for empowering sales rep to go make sure you're hitting up prospects and companies that are actually actively looking for your product or service. I mean, there's just so much available. And now AI driven, we're using a technology that actually listens to our sales conversations and tell us how much the sales rep talked about, how much the sales rep actually talked versus the prospect and what pain points were brought up and whether or not the objections were handled properly. I mean, just technology is completely changing the game in terms of how we go buy and sell today.
Yeah, I think the counterintuitive thing that we came across in that early days, back when we were doing it, most technology stacks were for the marketer, and because people just didn't believe that VPs of sales would have budget. And what we were able to show, we were charging $30 a month for salespeople to swipe their own credit card to use. And through the life cycle of the company, we went from $30 to $49 to $79 to $125 a month for charging for the platform. And what the market quickly realized was, just like marketers, salespeople are willing to pay some cash if they're more likely to go hit their number. Mm-hmm. And which goes to show, when you're building software, the closer you are to delivering more revenues or ensuring revenues, people will spend a tremendous amount of money, not thinking more than twice. And I think that's what kind of heralded a whole new stack of software businesses servicing the sales team and the revenue teams.
And also, I think there's been a big shift from the outside sales model to the inside sales model, and also just the divide and conquer model, right? The SDR leading the pack in terms of getting in the door, and then AEs. So there's that big shift happening in our sales space altogether, which is also kind of influencing all these technology buy.
It is interesting. Predictable revenue was written like 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, we tend to forget how old some of these things are, that they still feel new. The whole predictable revenue, Aaron Ross, when he ran that playbook, it was pretty much 20 years ago. He did that and wrote the book. When you start to think about inside sales, easily 15 years ago was when it started to get popularized, because mid-market companies were spending money on software, and software as a service was becoming a thing. And mid-market companies were like, we don't want to meet, just tell us what it is and we'll buy. And they would spend 20 to 50K on a deal. So I think we've hit maturity on inside sales and on SDR models. I think that the death of the enterprise rep is grossly exaggerated. I think that the enterprise is stronger than ever, and I think it'll continue to be, depending on your market and what you're selling and how much of a transformation you're bringing to an organization.
Most certainly. I actually had Aaron Ross a couple of weeks back on my episode, and I told him, you pioneered this whole sales 2.0, right? Just this outbound sales methodology.
Right.
Which is kind of crazy to even look back. He was kind of the forefront of this whole movement that we're all following. It's crazy to even think about it.
Yeah.
So of all the things you've accomplished, right? All the things you've kind of outlined, what is the biggest lesson you learned in the process of building your company?
Oh man, there's so many. I feel like I would be just doing a disservice by oversimplifying to one. But I think, if I were to be talking to salespeople and founders, who I talk to a lot to these days, I think the biggest thing is market. Markets are what really predicts and decides how successful your company is going to be, despite everything else. If you're in a really great market where you're solving an urgent and important problem and it's got budget, you can have a mediocre product and a pretty average team of people and still win. And you can have the best team in the world and the best product in the world, but if the market's not quite there, it won't matter. None of it will matter. And I think that's very much top of mind today as most of my time goes towards coaching early stage SaaS founders on how to build go-to-market machines from a strategy perspective. And getting the market strategy right is more important than ever. And that's probably the biggest thing that I learned.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting insight. A lot of people think, if you have this cool product that just a crazy bunch of stuff, that would solve. But that's not always the case.
Yeah, exactly. Like you think about, to dovetail back to your conversation, you started with Yesware and then ToutApp and then SalesLoft and then Outreach, and now you're on HubSpot. HubSpot does not nearly have all of the features that Outreach does, for example. Outreach is by far, in fact, I give Manny my hat tip all the time, because I think what he did is that he really, really went deep on product and really succeeded in that. And they did a tremendous job with it. But at the same time, it goes to show that the market is so huge and so strong. There's room for so many players. And even with HubSpot, which has maybe 20% of the feature set that Outreach has, they still do really well with their sales product and their CRM product. And I think it just goes to show the strength of HubSpot's market, for example. The idea that we're going to target small to mid-sized businesses. We're going to teach them how to be effective in sales and marketing through HubSpot Academy. And then we're going to give them software that helps them do that all under one stack. Like, that's a very powerful market opportunity versus Outreach, a go-to-market strategy, which is we're going to go for the biggest of biggest enterprises and sell them $125 seats and make sure that they have sales engagement software. Both great strategies, but one's clearly a better market. HubSpot's clearly in a better market when you think about the market cap and the maturity of that company.
Yeah, and the reason why we switched wasn't because Outreach wasn't doing its job. We switched away from Salesforce and went to HubSpot to consolidate all our tech stack, because we had marketing automation independent of sales CRM plus another sales enablement platform, and we were just having too many integration issues. We said, man, we got to consolidate this, right? That's part of the reason why.
And that's the strength of a market strategy, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you chose HubSpot because they serve your market better, not because they have the best product. And that's something that is very easy to forget when you're a startup founder.
Mm-hmm. So obviously you've kind of shared your story of the business you started in your college dorm room to the first exit, and then ultimately helping Marketo, right, getting acquired by Adobe. You've had a lot of those things you've done, and now you still keep going, right? You have this consulting business with courses for entrepreneurs and founders and all sorts of stuff you're doing. So what keeps you motivated? What's the why behind everything that you do?
Yeah, the why is impact. I think for me, I am happiest when I'm in a room with other entrepreneurial people and we're building incredible businesses. And that's what always drove me. And I think that every single startup and company I've been part of has gotten exited. We drove it to an exit. And so with that, and having worked with the best hedge fund, the best VC firm, the best PE fund, one thing I learned is their core principles to really scaling a business. One thing I learned is the difference between execution and strategy. And what I found now is a lot of, especially early stage companies, tend to focus much more on the execution and not enough on the strategy. Take sales engagement, for example. It's very easy to load up 1,000 emails and blast 1,000 people with an outbound email campaign. Like, we've made it tremendously easy. They'll gladly take your money. They'll let you do it. Now, those are essentially machine guns. Like, same thing, you can go into Facebook and spend $1,000. They'll gladly take your money and run the ads. Giant machine guns. What happens is these are execution engines. So when you load it up, it's very possible you're loading it up with blank bullets and targeting it towards the wrong place. That's the difference between strategy and execution. And so a lot of my time goes towards working with early stage founders, at scale founders with stalled SaaS businesses, to figure out what is the right bullets that you need for these incredible machines that we've built. And so right now I run a coaching program. I work with SaaS CEOs, and I help them figure out their go-to-market strategy in a very specific way. And what drives me for that is it's an interesting problem to solve. We've already solved a software problem. Before, 10 years ago when I started ToutApp, the software didn't exist to run at scale. Now we have the software at scale. Turns out, even with the software at scale, if you don't have the right strategy, you won't win. And I think that's a very interesting problem to solve. It's a very impactful problem to solve. It's a very smart group of people trying to solve it. So that's what my coaching program is designed around, to help folks solve for that. And I make no secret of the longer term strategy on this. I think that my goal is to work with 1,000 companies to help them figure out their strategy. And out of that will come the next RevTech platform. And that's what my next play will be. So I'm 37 right now. And so I think I want to do this for the next few years. And then every SaaS business you start ends up being a 10-year journey. So I still think I have one more SaaS business in me. But the core of the pattern is going to emerge out of my work I do now, working with SaaS founders.
That's awesome, because you're getting the firsthand data about some of the struggles that they have and what they're doing to optimize for revenue, right? I think I had ProfitWell CEO. I think he had similar experience as well. I think he ran into seeing how companies weren't able to optimize the pricing strategy for retention and growth. So he built a product, and I'm sure similar story is going to be what's coming out from you. Some sort of an idea is going to come from all these conversations you're having with entrepreneurs and some of the struggles they have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the beauty of it is it's a continually emerging landscape, and what we have barely touched upon is the power of AI and the impact of AI. What we've barely touched upon is tapping into the intersection of AI and pure marketing genius creativity. Those are things that I think we're going to be transforming over the next 10 years. The last 10 years, that was the easy version. It's like, how do we write down what we did, and how do we do it semi-automatically? This next 10 years, when in that intersection of revenue technology, is going to be very exciting.
That's awesome to hear. So obviously, as an entrepreneur, personal development is an important part, right? And you're actually in the business now, helping these guys do a better job coming up with strategy and also to improve their own skill set. What's your perspective on this whole concept of personal development, investing into coaching, consulting, those sort of stuff?
Yeah, the thing that I learned, especially in the ToutApp journey, but also as VP of strategy at Marketo, like Marketo, we were going through a 2-year transformation. I was the youngest senior vice president in the company, and everyone else had like decades of experience on top of me, and you had to kind of go toe to toe and earn your keep, essentially, in that, while working for one of the most disciplined and ruthless private equity firms in the world for SaaS, Vista. And so through both of those journeys, through the ups and downs, the one thing that I learned is mindset trumps a lot of everything else. And there's a very specific set of practices that you have to adopt to get your mindset right. Because if you don't have your mindset right, the right strategy, the right execution, the right tools, the right funding is not going to help. And it goes hand in hand. And similar to the go-to-market coaching program that I run, what I found was there was no one solving that. There was no one serving CEOs, high-performance founders on that. And so what that evolved into is I basically run 2 programs. One is my go-to-market program, it's go-to-market strategy. And the other is I run a founder to CEO program. As you're going from being a founder to a CEO, your business is going to be dramatically different every quarter. And therefore, you have to be a very different human every quarter. That means you have to get your mindset right. That means you have to treat yourself like a pro athlete, right? Like we watch pro athletes during game time. What we forget is pro athletes also train like an athlete. They play the game like an athlete. Then they go celebrate like an athlete. And then they go train like an athlete again. And a lot of times with entrepreneurship and founders and CEOs and high performance people, we get tricked into the martyrdom of hustle. And constantly, that's not how it works. How it works is you have to treat yourself like a pro athlete. So we teach you that in the program on how to treat yourself like a pro athlete. A few things that go into that. One, how to have the right core habits so that you can run at high performance. You train like an athlete, win like an athlete, celebrate like an athlete. How to build a team around you with the right people. And I'm not talking about your VPs for your executive team. I'm talking about you should probably have a therapist. It's just good to have. You should probably have a personal trainer. You should probably, you'd be shocked how little it costs to hire a personal chef, especially when you're responsible for a high growth organization to get your health right. So these are things that I teach inside of the program to help founders transform into CEOs as they scale their businesses so they can also scale themselves. Yeah,
which brings me to my question about leadership versus management. I think you've kind of alluded to this earlier. Basically, as a founder, you're involved in so many areas of the business, maybe the product idea, the marketing, the sales, sometimes operations, even HR, right? There's so many areas. And sometimes you also have to be that manager role because you're directly, there's a lot of people directly reporting to you. So you got to manage their performance and output, right? And then there comes that time you kind of have to move away from that leadership role and somehow let go of some of those hands-on things that you would do. So how was that transition happen for you, especially when you were starting ToutApp? And which mode do you typically operate in, more of a leader role or more in that manager role?
I think for the businesses that I've been part of, you kind of don't get the luxury to choose, and it's every hour you have to determine what hat you need to put on. I think that sometimes you have to be the leader, and I think sometimes you have to be able to zoom into a minute detail and figure out exactly how our transformation strategy in EMEA should work, and whether we need to be thinking about Dusseldorf right now, or do we just focus on Paris and London and Dublin? Like literally real scenario that I had to think about at Marketo. And I think that those are the kind of things, it's less about knowing management and leadership. I think you have to understand the distinction, but it's really about the ability to zoom in and zoom out, and understanding when you need to zoom out and understanding when you need to zoom in, and choosing the appropriate zoom level to actually be effective in terms of managing and leading. I think that's the hard part. That's the pro tip. If you can figure that out, everything else becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, because a lot of times I think that dichotomy, right? Sometimes you're just super hyper focused on just the micromanaging. I mean, I don't mean like the micromanaging in that sense, like overseeing every aspect of the business, that you're just too much into the weeds, that you're not able to get the big picture goal of why are we even doing that in the first place. Does that initiative even make sense for the big picture of our company?
Yeah.
Being able to have that. Which brings me to a conversation around the culture, because obviously when you're talking to founders and you're helping them build this high performance culture, what's your take on that? Because obviously culture is a big part of what a company becomes, right? Especially as an entrepreneur trying to build an organization.
I think culture is important, but I think that culture has turned into something that is a distraction and a crutch for a bunch of stuff that really doesn't matter. I think that what matters is that the organization is successful. What matters is that hard work is rewarded. What matters is that you are doing the right thing. What matters is that people feel like they're valued. What matters is that people feel like they have a path to growth. I think those are things that have existed since the beginning of time. I think that in corporations and organizations today, people have added a whole bunch of other crap that really doesn't matter. And it has become way too politically correct, and it has become walking on eggshells, and it's become like, this morning I was reading on LinkedIn about love contracts to replace inner office romance. And I think that whole set of areas of focus sounds good to talk about, giant waste of time, and it can distract you. And I think as a leader of an organization, you got to get your priorities straight. You're a business, not a nonprofit, and you need to understand what actually truly will move the needle. When you do that, and when you lead by that, and when you set the priorities of that, a byproduct of that is a certain type of culture, most likely the right type of culture, a culture of winning, a culture of having impact, a culture of promoting and celebrating each other. That's what matters. And I think that we have lost our way in really thinking about that in a pragmatic way.
Yeah, it's a good feedback and some thoughts there. Obviously, vision, like almost all the entrepreneurs that I've met, they're big visionaries, big picture, right? Great ideas and vision for the organization, but many of them fail to articulate that vision to the organization and try to get that buy-in, right? And I'm sure you're meeting with a lot of those entrepreneurs, you're coaching and consulting some of those guys. What are some practical advice do you have for entrepreneurs to really get the vision to the forefront of the organization, and also get the entire team to buy in and follow that big vision?
Yeah, if vision is what equated to success, then everyone would be a billionaire, right? The difference between the visionaries and the billionaires is that they learned how to earn the right to go execute on that vision. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about, your ability to zoom in and zoom out. If you're like, we're doing this and everyone in the world should be using our product, you have to first earn the right where your block, literally the people in the block you live in or the building you live in is using your product. Once you do that, then you earn the right to go maybe win the city, like the city 3-mile radius. Once you do that, maybe it's the city. Once you do that, maybe it's the state. Once you do that, maybe it's the nation. Once you do that, maybe it's the continent. Maybe, just maybe. Understanding that you have to earn your right to that broader vision, and that means that you got to be able to zoom in, zoom out to actually figure out what are the steps to get there. That is the difference between those who are visionaries. Everyone already thought of Google, but there's only 2 people that created Google and actually pulled it off, right? Like everyone would have been like, I just want it to be able to find anything I want. Great, like got it. You're a visionary. But only 2 people were able to pull that off. Why? Because they knew how to think about it step by step. That's what really matters.
Mm-hmm. So, which brings me to a question. Obviously, you've spent your entire career building sales products, right? And you've built technology around enabling salespeople and sales organizations do a better job in selling. And how has your approach on sales evolved over the years, from having built a company and now helping a lot of other founders build their own companies?
Yeah, so I'm an engineer by trade, right? I had to, because I was building ToutApp, and I was working with incredible VPs of sales and VPs of marketing as customers, eventually you realize that a great product isn't enough. You need proper sales and marketing. And I say this, and it's been like, I think B2B has the worst sales and marketers. Like we have some of the, like in the grand scheme of, you're selling Pepsi sugared water versus enterprise software, we have some of the worst marketers. We just do, like objectively in a leaderboard of marketing, we do. And I think that a lot of times technical founders like me get disillusioned because we see so much bad marketing, we tend to ignore it and poo-poo it to our detriment. So the big transformations I had to learn was, 1, sales and marketing is very much necessary. Number 2, sales and marketing is everything. If you're raising money, sales and marketing. If you're recruiting a great exec, sales and marketing. If you're retaining talent, sales and marketing. If you're running an all-hands, sales and marketing. If you are selling your product, sales and marketing. If you are being brought in for the vision part of a broader sales play that you're running, it's sales and marketing. It's all sales and marketing. And you have to embrace it. And there are ways of doing it that is great. There are ways of doing it that is incredible and inspiring. There are ways of doing it that drives to action, that drives down deal cycles, increases deal sizes. You just got to be inspired by the right type of sales and marketing, and you have to embrace it if you want to be successful.
Yeah, most certainly. And I think you've had the privilege of working for Marketo, and I remember reading a lot of the Marketo content in the early days, probably like 15, 20 years ago, right? Definitive guide on this or that, right? They write all the playbook on content marketing and lead nurturing and all those things. And I know even at ToutApp too, kind of the earlier in the sales engagement game, you were creating a lot of content around sales cadence and why you need to use automation and sequencing and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah.
But apart from just content marketing in general, creating content that's helpful and useful for your customers, what have you seen as in terms of practical executions, from a marketing standpoint that really helps on all those areas that you've just touched on, whether it be recruiting or acquiring customers or even retaining and growing your book of business?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Content marketing, I think, is a trap. A lot of people, what they do is they kind of crank through the motions of content marketing and churn out content, and they wonder why it's not doing anything. They're like, we've done everything. We're doing the podcast and we're writing a blog. We hired a content writer, and they're going through the motions, but there's no thought behind it, right? There's nothing authentic around it. There's nothing they're not intellectually curious. They're just kind of checking the boxes on the activities. And that's the fundamental difference. Like, you can't forget, it's a very noisy world out there. And you have to stand out, and you have to be compelling, you have to be authentic, and then you have to make sure it's crafted towards them buying, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that content marketing does a disservice to a lot of organizations. It's done very poorly in a lot of cases. Now, I'll tell you what works really well. I think what works really well is education marketing. Like truly committing to building a university within your org that teaches your customers how to be the best at what they do. Oh, and by the way, our product powers that. That's very powerful. Education marketing, I think, is very powerful. And there's a difference between education marketing and content marketing. Content marketing is churning out 5 podcasts or 5 blog posts. Education marketing is a course that teaches you how to go from point A to point B and get that promotion. And out of that, by the way, we can make it easier if you use our platform. That's education marketing. It's very compelling. And it actually has a higher bar because you're either showing results or not, regardless of whether you're using your platform. And I think those are the kind of things that really sets you apart. And I think you've got to just recognize the bar for what's needed.
Yeah, and I think when you were talking earlier about HubSpot, I think that's what they've done, right? They coined the term inbound marketing. They they create certification programs that are freely available for marketers on teaching them how to go acquire customers using inbound methodology. And they have now, sales training content, all sorts of stuff they've done, became an academy for free. And then now they're just in the process of make you buy their product.
And that's what great marketing is all about.
Most certainly. And I remember even before even started using ToutApp, you were already a marketer doing personal branding, right? You were kind of the face of the brand very earlier in the days of ToutApp. And even today, you have a personal brand that you built. So talk to the founders in terms of the importance of building that personal brand and some practical examples of how can they do it.
Yeah, I think that, the goal was never building a personal brand. Like even today, the goal was to very clearly articulate who I'm here to help and how, right? And so in the ToutApp days, we had T-shirts that says "I close deals." We still sell those T-shirts now, actually, under my new company, Unstoppable. So we now have "I close deals" and we also have "I ship code," and we have T-shirts that says "Ship code, close deals." Now, one way to look at that is, he's got a direct-to-consumer play, and he's got an e-commerce store using Shopify, and he's doing drop shipping on the T-shirts. That's not what we're about. But what we are about is getting out there and teaching every founder that they've got only 2 levers in their business. They're either shipping code or they're closing deals. Those are the only 2 things that matter. Everything else is a distraction. Ship code, close deals. Now, do we have T-shirts around that? Yes. Do we have a book on that? Yes. Do we have 3 YouTube episodes every week about that? Yes. And out of that emerges a brand, whether it's a company brand or a personal brand. It's the consistency. It's taking a position. It's teaching people how to get a certain outcome. And that's a playbook that Marketo did really well. John Miller, who's a freaking genius, Phil Fernandez, they were the founders. That's a playbook that HubSpot did really well. That's a playbook that Eloqua did very well. That's a playbook that Mark Benioff did really well. All the greats of SaaS did very well. They got out there and they said, here's the thing that you just have to get behind. And they know that in those early days, no one knew Marketo or Eloqua. Now we know it. No one knew HubSpot. But a lot of people knew who John Miller was. A lot of people knew who Dharmesh Shah was. And so they used their personal connections to get themselves out there and really lead this change, this movement, this new way of doing something. And I saw that, and I took a book from them, and I took a page from there, and I said, cool, we got to teach people how following up an inbound lead takes 8 to 10 touches, and most of your reps aren't going to do it. It takes a certain touch point. You need to email a certain way. This was not obvious. Now it's obvious, but it was not obvious back then. So we wrote a book on it, and we created T-shirts around it, and we ran webinars on it. It was purposeful, educational content that helped salespeople do better. And then at the end of it, say, oh, by the way, you want the magic easy button for this? Sign up for Tout. And that's what we do right now. Also, even with TK Kader, which is quote unquote my brand, but all it really is I work with SaaS founders. I help them build go-to-market strategies. They need to be shipping code and closing deals, and we teach them how to do it. And we have a coaching program that helps them do it more effectively. And I'll tell you how it works. We got a testimonial the other day. Someone joined my Mindset, the founder to CEO program, SaaS founder, worked through it last year, and got his diabetes under control. Now, we don't claim to get anyone's diabetes under control, but because he put in all these positive changes in his life, they got under control. And then he got an email saying, hey, we have this go-to-market program. And he's like, sweet, sign me up. And he signed up for the go-to-market program, and now they've tripled revenues through that. It is crazy. All we did was we just taught him the core principles. And by the way, he bought our software and our products. I think that's what great branding is. Standing for something, teaching these people, serving them. And sometimes you got to put your face on it, because otherwise, in a noisy world, no one cares about awesome.io, no matter how awesome it is. But they'll pay attention to a guy that maybe like they recognize or someone their friend knows. That's what I think is, and I think it's less so about brand or personal branding, but what you get out of it. And that's why I think it works so well.
Thank you. Thank you for that very good answer, because I think some of these founders are kind of nervous about putting their face in front of the company brand, because they're like, oh, this brand needs to live past me, all right? This company has to live past me, and I don't want to be the brand. But I think there's an important aspect of, like you said, there's some of the names that you've mentioned. John Miller, like I follow that guy because of the subject matter expertise that he brings to the table. Then he left when he left Marketo, he went on to start this new company, and he talked about ABM, and he was going around the country teaching people about this entire account-based marketing strategy, right? And he's definitely, you can attribute a lot of the knowledge and expertise that I've got from just reading his content or attending his webinars.
Yeah.
So it's an important value there. And I think once you become that subject matter expert, people trust you more, and they will prefer your product over somebody else's, right? Because they know, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. His product is going to perform much better than a cheaper alternative that I can find in the marketplace.
Yeah. You see, like when you do this, there's a distinct moment where all of a sudden people not only know your name, which is the outcome of a personal brand, but people know your company's name just as much, if not more, and it overtakes you. Like at a certain point, people stop thinking about TK and they just want to tout, and they wanted to talk to a happiness officer, a tout. And just recently, we have enough founders in our programs, we have enough subscribers in our YouTube channel, and just recently people start talking more about Unstoppable instead of just TK. And I'm still not used to it, because people are like, so tell me more about Unstoppable. And I have to think, all right, they're talking about all the stuff that I've been working on. Like, we're becoming a mini brand, but it comes from persistence and a consistent message. And it takes a little bit of time. And don't be afraid that all of a sudden, you're not that awesome. Like, they'll get over you. And the whole idea of it is to put yourself out there, to give it a fair shot, so that your company brand does become a thing, so that it gets a jump start and an on-ramp. When you do that, then eventually your brand will be even stronger, and you plus the company brand will be even greater, and that's where the magic really happens.
So obviously you're helping founders, especially to help them exit, right? That's part of what your goals are in terms of preparing them and helping them to scale their company to a level, right, that they are worth selling. And you also work for hedge funds and private equity firms, all sorts of areas where you had a lot of experience in. So what's your perspective, especially for these founders that are trying to grow and scale, this whole model of organic growth versus raising capital to infuse the money required to grow?
Yeah, I focus less on the exits and focus much more on how do we get you to scale predictably, effectively. How do you have a strategy for that? How do you get to the next stage of growth? And that's the advice that I always give. There are certain things that you can do to optimize an exit, but ultimately what you really want is a great business, because a great business gives you optionality. A great business gives you the optionality to be profitable, gives you optionality to grow faster, gives you the optionality to raise capital, gives you the optionality to sell for a premium. All of those things. So how do you build a great business? That's a big question. That's a really interesting question. And it is my belief that sales and marketing is where it truly lies. Like, yes, you need great product innovation, but without sales and marketing, you're not going to get there. And that's why I kind of focus on that intersection. And that's what I get founders to think about, like, what does a really compelling business and a scalable business, and how big can this get, and how do you zoom in and zoom out on those things? That's what we're focused on. Because a lot of times it's a lonely gig. You have your board members, you can't be honest with them. You have your VPs, you can't be fully honest with them. Maybe you have a co-founder, but you're limited by what the two of you know inside of the room. You can go talk to other founders, but everyone's killing it, so you can't even be honest with them, because that's the thing, right? You go to a meetup, it's like husband's like, oh, we're killing it. Everyone's killing it, of course. So that's not helpful. And so I was like, there's got to be a way where you can help these people and be honest about what it is. I did some angel investments after the Marketo exit, and then I hated it. I absolutely hated it because all the rage is raising a fund right now. And absolutely, because I would get on these Zoom calls with these founders, and I'd be like, so how's business? Like, tell me about, and they would go into pitch mode. And of course, they're killing it, of course. And I started to notice the calls where I get on where I still screen every call before they have to apply to join into my program. And then I do the call, and I figure out if they're a good fit, and then we get them in. It's a paid program. They're paying us, but they still have to apply. And the reason for that is we want the right people. And I noticed the difference between a pitch meeting and those application calls, because I'd get on the application calls and I'm like, just tell me why you want to join the program. And they'd be completely honest about what's going on. And we would actually be able to help them. And I think that vulnerability, being able to look at the business objectively and with reality, is what gets you to win. And I think that's what I would tell founders to think about. Like, are you looking at it objectively? Are you thinking about the levers? What are the blind spots? How do you actually rise above that? When you do that, then you start to get optionality on, do we grow faster? So that's the first thing. The other thing I'll mention is not every business should be a venture-backed business, right? Like, it just shouldn't. In fact, if you take a non-venture-backed ideal size market and you put venture capital on it, you'll lose. Everyone will lose. It's only a small percentage of businesses are truly venture-backable businesses where everyone wins. Otherwise, you'll lose 10 years of your life and show nothing for it. So I think that there's certain markets, again, going back to what we started with, that you should bootstrap. There's certain markets where you must fundraise. There's certain markets that it's just timed improperly. And you do the best to time and manage for those optimizations. No one really knows for sure, but there's principles to follow. And then you go at it and see where you go. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, and I think especially if you're trying to create a category or creating an industry as a whole, right, like a market as a whole, you probably need a lot of education time. Like you said, Marketo days or even HubSpot probably took 3 or 4 years to really coin the term inbound marketing, teach a lot of people about adapting that entire methodology, right? So that requires cash, and if you're not able to sell anything at that during that 3-year window while you try to build a product, of course you're going to need a capital. Well, if you're trying to get into an established market and just need a small percentage of the market share, maybe you can survive without having to seek funding.
Yeah, when you're thinking about category creation, especially in software, the greatest case study in the world for this is the marketing automation space. Eloqua came first. Marketo came nearly 5 years later, when Eloqua was about to IPO, but because Marketo came, Eloqua had figured out all the hard stuff. They figured out the difference between email marketing and marketing automation and lead nurturing and lead scoring. Marketo was able to come in, and they literally delayed Eloqua's IPO because of that. Eloqua had to be bought out by private equity. Vista, I think it was actually, or maybe one of their competitors. And then Marketo grew super fast. And then HubSpot emerged. And you start to think like, category creation is not necessarily all that's cracked up to be. It's not always the first pioneers that win in a category. Like Outreach was certainly not the first, neither was Google. So pioneers do have arrows in their backs. And so thinking about the market strategy really helps you understand what is necessary. Now, don't get me wrong, Eloqua still did great, right? But not $4.75 billion great. HubSpot still did great. Pardot did great. And so I think it's interesting to think about market and timing and category creation and whether you're the pioneer. Like, those are interesting strategic questions to ask yourself as you're going into scaling the company.
Awesome. Obviously, as entrepreneurs, right, we all have very limited time in terms of working on the business, working on your own personal development, all those things. So you got to have some productivity hack on how to get a lot of things done. So are there any specific productivity hacks that you have to keep you?
The biggest thing I recommend is Sunday afternoons. I set aside 2 or 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon and go through a pausing and reflecting and weekly planning exercise, both for yourself and for the business. And there's a very specific way I teach founders to do this. We actually have a web-based application that guides you through this. So you can go to unstoppablesunday.com and we'll help you plan your week every week, and we'll help you make sure that you stay present through the week. Do that one practice, just an hour every Sunday to plan your week. Everything changes. It's a complete game changer. I started adopting this about 10 years ago. Completely changed my life. And so that's what I recommend to really anyone that wants to run at high performance.
Obviously, you had an amazing career. You're still, helping entrepreneurs build, and you said you probably have one more SaaS in you before you call it its time, right? So basically, from all these experiences you've learned, right, if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently?
I probably wouldn't get married at 24. That was a mistake. I got divorced later. Aside from that, I think that regret actually is a flawed concept. Regret assumes that you can go back and change one thing differently and still end up with the outcomes you like and a different outcome for the ones you don't. Which, when you break it down that way, is like that's not a thing. The world doesn't work that way. I'm generally genuinely happy and fulfilled with where I am. I'm also just 37, and I feel like I'm just getting started. The average age of a B2B SaaS founder is really 40 something. Like that's when they've had enough domain knowledge to go really build that massive company. So I feel fortunate and blessed for the ups and downs, and there's been plenty of ups and downs on the road. And I'm just, a lot of what I'm doing right now is I've earned the right to be able to work on whatever I want for a little bit of time before I jump into the next venture back thing. And so I'm giving back to those that are going through the same journey based on lessons that I've learned.
Any parting wisdom for an aspiring entrepreneur or a founder?
Literally 2 levers to every SaaS business, every software company, and really probably any technology company. You're either shipping code or you're closing deals. So remember those 2 levers: ship code, close deals. That's what matters the most. It needs to be one or the other. And also practice Unstoppable Sunday.
Awesome. Well, TK, thank you so much for your wisdom and knowledge, and appreciate you sharing this time with us.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. You had really great questions. I appreciate the detail you went into, and hopefully your listeners got a ton of value, and I appreciate you having me on the show.
Most certainly. Thanks again.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.